Hi everybody, I'm Anuradha Basu and today I'm going to share with you the storyline of the murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. The story goes like this, that Dr. Shepherd, a resident of the King's Abbot village of England, wakes up one Friday morning to find that Mrs. Ferrars is dead. He quickly gets ready to go and attend to Mrs. Ferrars, but he finds he's too late because Mrs. Ferrars had died out of taking a sleeping medication, overdose of sleeping medication. Caroline, who is the sister of Dr. James Shepherd, and staying with him, says that she is pretty sure that Mrs. Ferrars had killed herself out of remorse for having killed her husband, Ashley Ferrars, in the last year. Dr. James Shepherd, on his way of return from the house of Mrs. Ferrars, meets Roger Ackroyd. Dr. Shepherd is a friend of Roger Ackroyd. Roger Ackroyd is a well-established businessman with the biggest house in the King's Abbot village. His wife had been Miss Peyton, who had actually drank herself to death. All right. She had had a son, Ralph Peyton, out of her first marriage, and Ralph Peyton stayed with Roger Ackroyd. Roger Ackroyd was actually having an affair with Mrs. Ferrars. He meets Dr. Shepherd and asks him to come over to his place for dinner that evening, and that he would like to tell something important to him. Okay, so on that day, Dr. James Shepherd is invited for dinner to the house of Roger Ackroyd. Dr. James Shepherd, on that very day, before going to dinner to Roger Ackroyd's place, meets three other people. One is Miss Russell, who comes to meet Dr. Shepherd, asking for medication for drug addiction. Then there is, he meets a certain Mr. Porro, who had come to King's Abbot village to act as a vegetable gardener, a cultivator of vegetable marrows. All right, and the third person he meets is Ralph Peyton himself at an inn, and there Ralph Peyton tells him that very morning he had had a quarrel and a confrontation with Roger Ackroyd over money matters, and he says he would have to handle these money matters, take a lone hand in these money matters himself. All right, now at 7:30 p.m., Dr. James Shepherd visits the house of Roger Ackroyd to attend to his dinner. They have dinner together, and then Roger Ackroyd invites him to his study to tell him something important. That night, in Roger Ackroyd's house, when Dr. Shepherd was there, the other people who were present were Mrs. Ackroyd, who was Roger Ackroyd's sister-in-law, and whom Roger Ackroyd supported and kept in her house after the death of her husband. Okay, who was supported by Roger Ackroyd, and Mrs. Ackroyd's daughter lived there. She was there in the house, Flora Ackroyd, who was actually engaged to Ralph Peyton. The Other person present was Hector Blunt, who was Roger Ackroyd's near close friend. Next, there was Jeffrey Raymond, the secretary, and John Parker, the butler. These were the people who were present in the house when Dr. Shepherd was having dinner with Roger Ackroyd. In the study, Roger Ackroyd told Dr. Shepherd that he was having an affair with Mrs. Ferrars, that Mrs. Ferrars had confessed to him that she had killed her husband, and she had actually killed her husband, and she had also confessed that somebody was blackmailing her. Now, at that point, the mail comes in. John Parker, the butler, brings in the mail into the study, and in the bunch of mail there is a letter from Mrs. Ferrars. Mrs. Ferrars had sent a letter to Roger Ackroyd, and that letter possibly contained the name of the blackmailer. Dr. Shepherd asks Roger Ackroyd to open the letter and see what is there in the letter, but Roger Ackroyd says he would do it later. Okay. Now, Dr. Shepherd leaves the house of Roger Ackroyd at 8:50 p.m. As soon as he returns home, there is a phone call, and he attends the phone call, and he shouts to Caroline, his sister, staying with him, and says that Parker, the butler, had called and said that Roger Ackroyd had been killed, murdered. He rushes back to Roger Ackroyd's place. The first time he had come with his doctor's bag. This time also he rushes back to Roger Ackroyd's place, and there Parker says that he had not called Dr. Shepherd. Another point is that when Dr. Shepherd was leaving Roger Ackroyd's place after dinner, he had met a strange a person who had seemed oddly familiar, lurking in the precincts of the grounds of the Ackroyd house. Now, when Roger Ackroyd comes back, and Parker says that he had not called him, they are rather confused, but they break open the door of the study, and they find that Roger Ackroyd was there, stabbed in the neck, murdered. Now, after this, the police arrive, and there are certain investigations, and Flora Ackroyd says that he had seen Roger Ackroyd last at 9:50 p.m. when he had said that he wanted to be alone in the study and not to be disturbed. And the Jeffrey Raymond says that he had heard Roger Ackroyd's voice at 9:30 p.m. Okay, these are the two statements which are taken after the murder. The murder weapon is a Tunisian dagger which was on the study table of Roger Ackroyd. And two other things to be noted are that Parker seems very nervous, the butler, and Ralph Payton, the son, Roger Ackroyd's son, is nowhere to be found. Right? Now, the next morning, Flora asks Shepherd to help her to convince Shepherd's neighbor, certain Mr. Poirot, who was actually the famous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot, to investigate the case. Hercule Poirot agrees to take up the case only on the condition that he would follow it to the end. Okay? Now, then Hercule Poirot starts investigating the case. Inspector Raglan points out to Hercule Poirot that somebody, the murderer, had come in through the window of Roger Ackroyd's study, and he was wearing shoes which had special studded nails, underneath in the sole, specially made soles, which Ralph Payton used. Raglan was pretty sure that it was Ralph Payton who had committed the crime. Then certain other clues also are unraveled, as the story progresses. The other clues are that there is the chair, in which Roger Ackroyd was found. In between the time Shepard leaves the study and the time Shepard and Parker enter break open into the study, the chair seems to have shifted from its place. Okay. In the summer house outside the estate of Roger Ackroyd, there is found a piece of cloth and a goose quill. In a goldfish bowl is found a ring on which is inscribed the name from R, capital R. So these are certain clues which evolve during the investigation, which are revealed during the investigation. Then Ackroyd's will is open. Roger Ackroyd has left his money to Mrs. Ackroyd, some money to Mrs. Ackroyd, to Flora Ackroyd, and to Miss Russell, but most of the money is left to Ralph Payton. Now, at that point again, Raymond discovers that some money is missing from the drawer in the desk table of Roger Ackroyd, and somebody has stolen some money. Now, on being questioned, it is found that Flora Ackroyd confesses that, but before that, two other witnesses are interrogated. They are Ursula Bourne and Elsie Dale. Now, Ursula was the housemaid also, but she had been dismissed from her job earlier on that Friday morning. And at this point, Poirot aggregates all the suspects, gathers all the suspects in one place. These suspects are Miss Russell, Hector Blunt, Ursula Bourne, Flora Ackroyd, Mrs. Ackroyd, Geoffrey Raymond, John Parker, Hector Blunt. All of them are assembled in one place, and Poirot says that each of them were concealing a secret from him. Okay. The next thing that happens is that Dr. Shepard tells Poirot his theory that someone had entered the house of Roger Ackroyd through the window, definitely, but it could not have been Ralph, because Ralph had left the window open, and possibly and because from Flora's account, he had seen Roger Ackroyd at 9:50 p.m. So possibly somebody had entered the study after Ralph had left the study, or after Ralph had left the study. So that means Ralph could not have been the criminal. Now, Poirot admires Shepard's method of deduction. but he says that he really did not himself also think that Ralph was the criminal. Okay. At this point, Dr. James Shepherd realizes that Poirot was hiding some secrets from him. Now, the next day, Mrs. Ackroyd, whom Roger was supporting after the death of her husband, confesses that she had stolen some silverwares from the house of Roger Ackroyd because she was deeply in debt in money. Now, this is again another revelation. After this, Hercule Poirot decides to reenact the case of the circumstances of the murder of Roger Ackroyd to eliminate some suspicions he has in his mind. And he realizes after the reenactment that Flora Ackroyd has been lying about the time when he had seen Roger Ackroyd. He has not seen Roger Ackroyd at 9:50. She had not seen Roger Ackroyd at 9:50 p.m. She had said that to hide the fact that she was the one who has stolen the money from the desk of Roger Ackroyd. Then Hector Blunt comes forward and says that after Flora confesses that she has stolen the money, Hector Blunt comes forward and says that he had stolen the money. It was he who had taken the money, not Flora. Poirot points out that Hector Blunt was in love with Flora Ackroyd, although Flora Ackroyd was engaged to Ralph Payton. Okay, now Reglan, that is Inspector Reglan, then takes Shepherd and Hercule Poirot to meet a man named Charles Kent. This man is apparently the man who had been seen by Dr. James Shepherd on the precincts of the Ackroyd household the night of the murder. He was a drug addict son of Miss Russell, and on that night he had come to meet Miss Russell in the summer outhouse. Okay, in the summer outhouse outside the estate. Right now, in that outhouse, that night Charles and Miss Ursula had met, and Ursula, Charles and Miss Russell had met, and Ursula, on being questioned, reveals that Ursula Bourne was the secret wife of Ralph Payton, the son of Roger Ackroyd, and when she had learned that Ralph Payton would have to marry Flora Ackroyd to inherit the wealth of Roger Ackroyd, then she had abandoned the ring that Ralph had given her in the goldfish bowl. Okay, so certain clues which had been found earlier are clarified at this stage of the story. And then that evening, Poirot assembles all the suspects in the study of Roger Ackroyd. The suspects are Ursula, Hector Blunt, Mrs. Ackroyd, Flora Ackroyd, Geoffrey Raymond, John Parker, Dr. Shepherd, and all these people are assembled in the study of Roger Ackroyd. Then Ralph Payton is produced, who had been absent all this time. Ralph Payton had been hiding with Dr. Shepherd. Dr. Shepherd, knowing that Ralph Payton was innocent, had been keeping him under shelter, because he was under suspicion. At this point, Hercule Poirot asks them to themselves confess their guilt. Everybody goes away, nobody confesses their guilt, everybody leaves the study. Hercule Poirot asks Dr. James Shepherd to stay back. He then tells Dr. James Shepherd that he knew the secret of James Shepherd, that James Shepherd was a murderer of Roger Ackroyd. What had really happened is that Dr. James Shepherd had used a dictaphone to record the voice of Roger Ackroyd and had played it so that at 9:30 it would be heard that Raymond would hear that Roger Ackroyd was talking to James Shepherd, or Roger Ackroyd was calling James Shepherd over the phone. Okay, so it was Roger Ackroyd's voice which had been recorded in the dictaphone to show that he had been calling Dr. Shepherd at 9:30 p.m. That is why Raymond had said that he had heard the voice of Roger Ackroyd at 9:30 p.m. Actually, he had used an American client of his to call him from a train station nearby. Okay, so it was not Parker also who had called James Shepherd. And then James Shepherd had used similar incriminating marks which would incriminate Ralph Payton, like the shoes, etc. And he had also removed the dictaphone, which is why the chair was moved. Now the question arises that why had Shepherd done this murder? That is because Dr. Shepherd was a blackmailer of Mrs. Ferrars. And the letter which Mrs. Ferrars had sent to Roger Ackroyd had also been removed by James Shepherd much earlier. James Shepherd had left the study at 8:30 p.m. and the murder had also been committed at 8:30 p.m. Okay, not at 9:30 nor at 9:50. And James Shepherd had actually was blackmailing Mrs. Ferrars because Mrs. Ferrars was having this affair with Roger Ackroyd and had also killed her husband, and James Shepherd himself was in debt due to certain bad investments. Okay, so Hercule Poirot leaves it to Dr. James Shepherd to either confess himself or end himself, to maintain his social facade. Hercule Poirot gives him the opportunity to maintain his social prestige as a doctor by not handing him over to the police. The novel has a very moralistic ending of judgment not being imposed inhumanly upon the criminal. Dr. James Shepherd that night writes out his entire confession and kills himself with an overdose of sleeping medication. Okay. The two motives that come out in this entire novel are that one is money. Everybody is in need of money, starting from Ralph Payton to Mrs. Ackroyd, to Flora Ackroyd, to Miss Ursula Bone, to Miss Russell. Everybody seems to be in need of money. And the second motive seems to be love relationships. There are relationships between Mrs. Ferrars and Roger Ackroyd, relationships between Flora Ackroyd and Hector Blunt, but Flora Ackroyd is supposed to marry Ralph Payton. Ralph Payton has a secret wife, Ursula Bone, but Ralph Payton is engaged to Flora Ackroyd. And thus all kinds of relationships are entangled, and then there is a blackmailer who turns out to be Dr. James Shepherd, who had been blackmailing the love relationship of Roger Ackroyd and Mrs. Ferrars. Okay? And thus the novel ends with the most trusted and socially respectable person as the murderer. And what is more surprising is that the murderer is the narrator of the story. Never in a detective novel is the narrator the murderer. The narrator is a right-hand man of the detective. Both of them are hand in hand in solving the case, and the narrator is generally a very trusted friend of the detective. Both of them are above the criminality of murder. But here, the narrator turns out to be the murderer, and that is the most surprising fact in the novel, okay, which makes it such a unique detective novel of Agatha Christie. Thank you.